Hello, everybody. I'm supposed to wait still, I think. Yes? No? Bueno? Okay. All right. So, hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for being here in what has got to be the single most amazing scene that I've ever been for a journalism discussion. Before we jump in, just a couple of notes of housekeeping. There has been some confusion, and just for the record, I would like to state that I am neither Veronika Munk nor Galina Timchenko, and none of us are in fact those people. That's totally my fault. There have been a few changes in the panel, given how I would say dramatically the region of Central and Eastern Europe has been undergoing changes, and we have been changing the panel to reflect those, to try to focus on the most important issues, and hence the print version was launched a little bit earlier, and the online version is more updated. So just in case there's any confusion, to make that clear, we will be focusing on the situation of media in Central and Eastern Europe, with a focus specifically on Ukraine, on Belarus, on the broader region, and I think it's actually quite, in a way symbolic that we have three people here, Daryna from Ukraine, Daniil from Belarus, and myself, Jakub Parusinski, from Poland, as the moderator, which is in some ways also symbolically the role that Poland is, not as a moderator, but as an assistant in sort of what's happening in the region. So that is the first point of housekeeping. The second point is that because of the COVID restrictions, as I understand, there will be no ability to ask questions directly. If you want to ask a question, please DM me on Twitter. It is J_PARUS, pretty short. If you write my name, Jakub Parusinski, into Twitter, that's where you'll find me. The DMs are open. I should be able to see anybody. I'll make sure that that's, yep, all right, there we go. Now it's totally open, so if you have any questions, please ask them. So with that, I think we can jump in. So it's been an exceptionally difficult couple of years, I think, in Central and Eastern Europe, which have gotten worse and worse and worse, and have now sort of reached a situation that I think is it is not an exaggeration to describe it as apocalyptic. Just to sort of reflect on what is the context, because obviously we're aware of what has been happening over the last month and a half, but the context in which this has been happening is also quite important. Press freedom across the region, almost universally in all of the countries, has been declining quite severely. The level of repression of media that we have seen, especially in places like Belarus and Russia, but not just, in Bulgaria and Slovakia, journalists have died. The whole region has been pretty much of a disaster. In Belarus and Russia, there has been a very sort of systematic targeting of the media. Most of them are now out of the country. In Russia, I think the name of the game is it's over. On top of that, we have had COVID, which has been a great disruptor for media in the region. We have had a revolution in Belarus, which has been absolutely brutally taken apart. And then the one country that had actually been improving in terms of media freedom, and where I would say, which was an oasis in the desert, where the media were free and relatively free, relatively successful. Of course, you can always find problems, but I think the situation was improving. Ukraine was essentially attacked by the worst. And it is no accident, I think, that the most anti-press autocratic states have now for a month and a half been attempting to destroy one of the freest ones, or sort of the most positively trending countries in the region. So with that being said, as a context, I'd like to introduce the speakers today. So Daryna Shevchenko, CEO of the Kyiv Independent, who has made a long and difficult journey from Ukraine to be here, and thank you so much for that, Daryna. As well as Daniil Bogdanovich, COO of Infopoint, an agency that gathers quite a few Belarusian media in exile, who has made the journey from Vilnius. Thank you so much, Daniil, as well, for being here. But let's start with I think the most pressing matter, which is the question of what is the reality for Ukrainian media today. So, Daryna, can you tell us a little bit about what is the situation now?
Hi, and I'm happy to be here. It was, just to decrease the level of drama a little bit. My journey was safe. It was just a little bit too long. And the reality of journalists in Ukraine, so, I've been at a few panels at this festival, and I hear, that there are lawsuits against journalists, and there are, pressure on journalists. There is problems with the lack of access to information. Well, in Ukraine, the biggest problem is that journalists are being killed by Russian missiles or shot or gunned down, targeted specifically. Their parents, their families, children are kidnapped to make sure that the journalists come out and they can be captured by Russians. So that's what's happening in Ukraine. And I just want to support Jakub's point about the fact that Ukraine was actually good. We had media freedom in Ukraine, and it's not like we were granted this media freedom. We fought for it tooth and nail. We had a lot of revolutions. We had a lot of protests. We would scrutinize the authorities to make sure that every crime against journalists is investigated. We were putting a lot of pressure on them. We had media watchdogs, independent ones. We had a lot of independent media outlets emerging. A lot of them became legacy outlets in the last 10 to 15 years. And when I joined the media 12 years ago, there were precisely 4 independent media outlets. 2 of them were Radio Liberty and BBC. And since then, there are dozens of them. And we, as journalists in Ukraine, we made sure that we create a civil society, a functional one, that can protect the media freedoms. And we did. We succeeded. Unlike, for example, Russia, where they pretty much failed it. They kind of failed at their job. They didn't create the civil society. They didn't do anything. And we are suffering because of that, pretty much. That's the reality of journalists. When you go on an assignment, there is a 50-50% chance of being killed. And I'm not exaggerating it. Even in the liberated towns, if you go to report on how the town looks after it's being occupied or besieged, there are a lot of landmines, and journalists are getting killed as we speak because they go there to report on the atrocities of Russia. So, that's a Ukraine media landscape now in a nutshell.
And just to make that a little bit about the reality of the media organizations. So previously, Kyiv was a hub. It's sort of fair to say that a lot of especially for the national media, the offices were there. What is the situation for most of the media nowadays? Where are the people working? What conditions? What does it look like?
I mean, it's different for different media. I generally just want to make a remark that I'm extremely proud of how Ukrainian media community behaved when the war started. Many media came together to join forces in the reporting of war. and many media continued working despite the difficulties, because you can understand probably that we lost commercial revenues overnight. For some of the Ukrainian media, it was 80% of their revenues, and they had a staff of people willing to continue to work, and they had to pay salaries. So it was difficult, but I think it's fair to say now that Ukrainian media managed to stay afloat and to continue reporting in this crucial time. As for where people are, I think it's also different for different people. You have to understand that you know, a dead journalist is a bad journalist, so we kind of have to keep people safe, first of all. And the priority is for them to be safe and to be able to relocate their families. A lot of them have children, older parents. So we at the Kyiv Independent said that, you know, you have to make sure that you and your families are safe, and then, you know, let us know how and when you can come back to work. A lot of people dealt with that. So in the beginning, there were a lot of moving parts. People were on the road, trying to take care of their families, relocating them abroad, and then coming back. Essentially, for our team, the team is scattered across central and western Ukraine. We had from the day one and until now, we had 2 people reporting from the field. Then a few people more came back. So now the team of 5 to 6 people is in Kyiv. There is an editor in central Ukraine. There are very few journalists in Lviv. I relocated to a different western Ukraine oblast in 2 weeks after the invasion started. For the first 2 weeks I was in Kyiv. And we don't have, so right before the war we rented an office. We are a startup, you know, that Kyiv Independent was founded 4 months ago, and we finally got our own office. We were very happy about that, but you guess what, you know, now we don't use it. But as we are coming back to Kyiv, I think we will. As for the rest of Ukraine and the media landscape, I think Lviv became some kind of a hub for journalists to work at. I know that at least one newsroom relocated to Lviv, and they set up a studio in Lviv to broadcast from there. I think a lot of TV channels moved to Lviv, their operations to Lviv, to broadcast from there, from a safer place. But generally, I think many newsrooms just, you know, would decide as they go on how to deal with this.
Okay, and just to maybe give a little bit of a context for everybody who's not quite as familiar with Ukraine. So Lviv is in the west of the country, and it's become a sort of temporary capital. But at the same time, it's a city that had, you know, depending on where you draw the line, 500,000, 700,000 inhabitants, and it's probably twice that at this point. You know, it's really bursting at the seams. Ukraine has 10 million people internally displaced, 2 million, 3 million who have left the country.
I think it's 4 million, yeah.
4 million. And so, you know, the situation is you also need to deal with that. So at least my impression was also that a lot of the media was started by going to Lviv, but then realized that that place is too crowded, and they have since sort of dispersed around the region, which is quite a sort of mountainous, picturesque, in good times at least, but it's very difficult to stay in the city itself because of the amount of people.
I mean, it's not that difficult. I mean, I've just been there like 2 days ago. It's all right. People come and go. People mostly like use Lviv as a hub to meet other people, to meet their colleagues, to meet international reporters who come to Lviv all the time. And Lviv was also one of the closest cities to the Polish border. So a lot of things go through Lviv. Less people maybe now stay there, and a lot of people are now coming back to Kyiv as the Kyiv Oblast was liberated. Kyiv is the capital of Ukraine, just for the context. Yeah. The Oblast was liberated maybe a week ago, and now people are starting to come back.
Would it be fair to sort of say that to some extent, the location of the journalists needs to mirror the location of where the population is? So in the sense of, if you have sort of 10 million people who left from the east to the west, and then 4 million who left and out, do you need, is that where the story is? you know, the story is on the front lines, but it's also with the people who are displaced. It's the people internally, externally.
I'm not sure about that. I think the story, so for Ukrainians, the story is at the front line. And many journalists try to get to the front line somehow. It might be a front line in Kyiv, that was easier. It can be a front line in the eastern southern part of the country, which is much more complicated to get to. I think journalists, it's fair to say the journalists are very, you know, quick to, you know, they move around a lot. So to get to Lviv, it's easy. Relatively easy. You can jump on a train or a bus and you will be in Lviv in like some 15 hours something. But so you don't have to like stay in Lviv for a story. You can come or call people who are displaced. There is no problem with that. To be physically present is important to cover the front line and the atrocities that Russia is causing in the cities that are in active combat. I think that's where journalists have to go physically, and sometimes it's, you know, most of the times it's very dangerous. If in Kyiv Oblast it was 50-50% chance of dying on the job, in south and eastern Ukraine it would be much higher.
Okay, and then one of the things to also consider is, so obviously there is something like a profession of a war correspondent, right? That's a specialization in the journalistic field. But that takes, you know, months, if not years, of training, of expertise, of equipment, of people around you. You know, is that something that is even realistic for most Ukrainian media to sort of to get their people ready? I'm not just talking about the vests, right? Like, okay, bulletproof vests. Great, you have it. Great helmet, you have it. But
well, we didn't actually.
Well, I mean,
it's thanks to the genomics and the fixed effort that we have them now. Because before the war, we didn't. We at the Kyiv Independent were a startup, so I can forgive us for the negligence. But also, many Ukrainian media didn't have any protection gear. And when the war started, everybody sent their journalists out with just like, you know, good luck. I mean, I'm making a joke, but it's not funny really, but that's the reality of it. We tried to get some protection gear like a week before the war started, and we couldn't. There was nothing left in Ukraine. So that, you know, that seems like the easiest part of being the war correspondent, but it was actually a big problem. And as for the expertise, well, we had a defense reporter on the staff, a journalist who have some experience in, first of all, in the combat reporting in 2014, because the war in Ukraine started 8 years ago. It didn't start 1.5 months ago. And he also did some war reporting in other regions. And so we kind of had one staffer with the experience. But it wasn't easy at the same time, and one person is not enough. I don't think many Ukrainian media had anyone,
yes,
you know, with that experience. I know maybe of 2 more war reporters in Ukrainian media. One works for TV, well, 2 of them work for TV. Yeah. So, and for the rest of us, no, we didn't have these people. And, you know, we didn't make an effort to train anyone because when we thought of war coming, we didn't think it would be this. We thought, we knew somebody asked me today, like, but you didn't have any clue that the war will start. Of course it had a clue. Everybody was talking about the war, but we thought it will be different. We expected an advance from the east, maybe, but we didn't expect that they'll start bombing Kyiv on day 1. And that's what, you know, kind of disturbed all the expectations and the contingency plans we had, right? So, no, we didn't, and there was no expertise, and now it's kind of too late for the trainings, you know. Even if we find expertise in other regions, we can find war reporters who will be willing to talk to us about it. Now we simply don't have time. Most of the Ukrainian media are understaffed. Some people just fell out of the newsroom operations because they couldn't work out of the bomb shelter, for example, or, you know, they had to take care of their families. Still are. Many people quit because they had to relocate, and, you know, many had to cut the salaries and stuff. So I think it's that circle pretty much now.
Thank you for that. And just for context, the person who, so Kyiv Independent was very lucky to have is Ilya Ponomarenko. If you've been following on the news, he's at this point, has grown to over 1 million followers on Twitter and is probably one of the main sources on what is happening in Ukraine for the world. Thank you for that, Daryna. Let's zoom out a little bit and also sort of look at what the situation is in Belarus. So Daniil, thanks so much for joining. Can you tell a little bit about sort of Infopoint, which is the network that you're representing, and maybe just for context as well, where did it come from? What was the original, the origin, and who are the members of this?
Thank you. So that's a funny thing, but it all started like an initiative to cover the pandemic, because Belarusian officials, they've just ignored the pandemic, and just in 1 month, everything dramatically changed. So the presidential campaign started, and police started arresting people, journalists, candidates. So we switched our focus to presidential campaign. One of our editors-in-chief, Igor Losik, he was detained. He was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. Yeah, and after that we realized that we have to just, to ask our employees to leave the country because of their safety. Unfortunately, we have a bad case. One of our journalists came back to Belarus to her family, and she was detained too. She got 6 years of imprisonment too. So suddenly in October of 2020, we realized that we have around 50 journalists, and we have, we grown up. We have to move further. We realized that we need to make an NGO to proceed.
So October 20, this is just for context as well, because so many things have happened over the last 2 years. This was in the sort of the heat of the revolution, right?
So the election has passed. The protests started. So massive rallies, like around several thousands of hundreds of thousands people on the street. And mass arrests and something like that. Okay. So we realized that we have to support our journalists not only with salaries, but also with like some legal questions, with psychological issues, and later with accounting. So we made like a back end for media. We have overall 16 media today, and it's around 200 million views monthly, and around 300 unique daily entries by those media.
And these are primarily Telegram, right? Like this is, Telegram is a big chunk of it. There's also a couple of websites, a YouTube channel, that, if I understand correctly.
We have like some media have like at the same time YouTube channel, Instagram, Twitter, Telegram. But the Telegram is the best way to bypass all the blockings and restrictions, because all the independent media in Belarus are recognized as extremists. So, and because of that, their websites are blocked, so you can only access it with a VPN and no other way.
And also Telegram is quite good in terms of operating when you have a restricted amount of data flow. So sorry, I'm adding a little bit of context here, but it's important to understand sort of the specifics of the different markets. There was a lot of words I remember at the time of the start of the revolution that this was really the Telegram revolution, because the authorities basically shut down access to the internet. Like 97% of bandwidth was down. So imagine your Wi-Fi running at 3% of its capabilities. And the amazing thing is that Telegram still is able to operate at this level, even when most websites are already down. So you know, when you lose 5% of bandwidth, especially a lot of the image-heavy and video-heavy ones. But so, sort of coming back to your story. So you have these, all of these media properties. Starting, of course, with informing people about COVID, because Belarus was one of the countries where COVID did not exist, right, officially, for quite a long time, or was at least ignored. And then the revolution ends, and you know, all of these media, all of a sudden, you have journalists who are in jail, you have people who are facing legal problems, and you realize that, look, operating out of Belarus is no longer possible. Yeah, is that sort of a fair assessment?
Yeah, so today it's not possible to work from Belarus because it's very dangerous for journalists. Like in Ukraine, you may get killed. In Belarus, you may get imprisoned for 15 years or so. And it's not like to be imprisoned in Norway. You are a subject of tortures almost. So they torture you with chlorium and a lot of different things. They put you in a cells so located so down, so the TV does not work there. Yeah, so you have a lack of information there. You can only watch like state TV, which is like full of propaganda.
Yeah, and so right now, your agency with all of these media, you are operating from abroad, right? So this is essentially like fully in exile. While
yeah, actually, we were trying to register an NGO in Poland for 9 months, but we met like bureaucratic obstacles, and finally we registered it in Lithuania, in Vilnius. So yeah, we are based in Vilnius, but our journalists are located in Poland, in Lithuania, and in Kyiv. Some of them are still there. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think sort of it's very interesting to see sort of also from I mean tragic, yes, but also so to some extent, you know, the media had to evacuate to outside of the country in the case of Belarus. What about the audience? Because a lot of the audience has like the people, you've also seen massive emigration from Belarus in terms of the readers, the viewers, and so forth. Where are they now? I mean, obviously, VPN tells you that they are all in Africa, right? But
actually, it's hard to say because, for example, Telegram does not give such information. But what I can say is that state terror works because they label you as an extremist, and it means if a person subscribed to a channel got detained or his phone checked, and they see that he or she is subscribed to a channel, person gets 15 days of imprisonment or even a criminal charge. So people are scared of being charged, prosecuted, so they are unsubscribing from time to time. Yeah, so all of Belarusian media are going down.
Okay. Okay, so this is the context, right, in which we're operating. Most recently, on top of all of this, we've had essentially one of certainly the region's biggest market in terms of media shut down. Now, okay, I guess that I understand that this is very speculative, but I would like you to speculate. What is going to happen? Because we've seen that Belarus has been closed. Ukraine is open, but under is an incredibly dangerous place for media to operate. And then we have the situation of Russia, right, where media have also basically been, turned off, and you have the case of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands people who tried to exit the country as soon as they could, because as I understand now, travel is almost impossible. A lot of the media have relocated also to the Baltics. I'm not sure whether the projects have been re-established or not re-established, but what does that mean for the media market generally? Because for me at least,
generally, we are fucked. And, you know, there is no easy way out of this. It's not like, you know, we can be optimistic and say, you know what, we'll come together and then suddenly everything becomes okay. It won't become okay. You know, Belarusian media lost their audiences. It's on and off. It didn't stop. I stayed with a friend of mine from Belarus in Warsaw on the way here, and she showed me Telegram channels where apparently Belarus authorities broadcast the tortures of activists and journalists. And this is horrible. You know, they kidnapped them and tortured them. They shot them in the knees or something like that. It's horrible. It's happening in the center of Europe. And, you know, we have to save what's left of these markets. I think Ukraine, you know, in Ukraine there are a lot of moving parts. It's no way we can make an assessment that will be anywhere close to reality, because we just don't know. Every day we stopped planning in Ukraine, you know, we just think like, okay, well, we're through tomorrow and that's good enough for us. It's not like there is a way to strategize over something. I met a few partners here and they're like, so what's your strategy? I'm like, guys, I don't have a strategy. I have an operational plan at best. And I'm trying to see where that, you know, leads me. There's no way to make a strategy now, but also that, you know, for media in Ukraine, that gives us a space to basically operate quickly and make quick decisions. And I think that's something that can save us. With the support of the, you know, other countries and the cross-national initiatives, we can probably survive. You know, it can be, you know, it can be different things. It can be the networks we can join that would provide some kind of support. It can be both, I think, both for us and for Belarusian media too. It can be networks, it can be initiatives, it can be, you know, initiative to, you know, basically spread the word about the fundraisers that we do now or something like that. A network that can help to monetize together or something. So, you know, I don't think we can make a prediction that will work out, but we can try to survive as the goal. I think that's you know, what's coming. Survival.
So I would like to build on two things that you mentioned. One a little bit later about the network, because I know, Daniel, that you have some announcements in this direction that actually concern both of you, but also a lot of other media. But just let's get to that in a moment. This idea that you mentioned, Daryna, which is we need to save what's left of this, because you know, rebuilding institutions, rebuilding industries, once they have been completely wiped out, is something that is incredibly difficult. And I think this is also something that is in the, you know, as someone from Central and Eastern Europe, you know, we almost instinctively understand what it is like when some force comes, whether it's from the East or the West, you know, Polish after all, and essentially tries to wipe out all of your civilization, right? Whether it's on a country level, on an industry level, on a societal level, whatever. Rebuilding from scratch is incredibly difficult. And what you try to do in order to preserve something when it is under an incredible attempt to be destroyed, essentially is that you try to hold on to a piece of it, keep a piece of it intact that you can later use to seed and to rebuild upon, rather than starting from scratch.
But it's not just keeping something intact. It's also making sure that this something is alive and functional, because it's not like, you know, we can just freeze these last bits of independent media alive and, you know, just not touch them. They need to be functional. They need to function. Otherwise, this war is lost. Otherwise, there is no chance in hell that, you know, we'll come back ever to normal life, either us in Ukraine or our colleagues in Belarus. So we need to make sure that they're also functioning, taking into account the whole situation. And, you know, by saying that we don't have any strategic plans, it's, you know, it's probably fair to say that we'll have to come to some sort of strategic plans, some sort of crisis strategies where we could adapt to this. So the task is actually not just to preserve, but to make sure it's functional and to make sure these media that survive can adapt to this reality and function in this reality and develop in this reality. Because, you know, media is very fast-changing market. Just preserving something is a dead sentence.
Yeah, I know that some Belarusian media, they're, you know, trying to adapt, so they're switching their focus to the local news. For example, they left Belarus, they came to Poland, so they start to cover some, I don't know, Polish news for Belarusian immigrants there. But I'm not sure that's how it should work.
I believe this is the project MOST that you're referring to in Białystok, in Eastern Poland.
I think it's very important to keep Belarus in focus, to keep our station, Ukraine, Belarus in focus, so we will not, I don't know, we will not forget what is going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly what I meant by adapting. I didn't mean to change the information focus. I meant to adapt to, like, to adapt to the new managerial circumstances, like how you organize the work, how you pay salaries, where your legal entities are located, what is the, you know, how much you can spend and how much you can have, you know, somewhere deep in the pocket, so you could, you know, dig in if worst comes to worst. And, you know, that's what I meant, not like, you know, let's stop talking about Ukraine and Belarus and.
No, but I think, well, maybe to challenge that a little bit, but isn't it both in a sense, right? So I think I totally agree with the idea. Like, you can't hold media and say this is a museum piece, right? Like, you know, like actually Italy is such a great place to talk about this. Like, oh, look, we have a piece of Ukrainian or Belarusian media, and you put it behind the glass and you show that this is what it looked like, you know, in the 21st century. But so they need to continue to operate, they need to continue, but both commercially and editorially. But I think, Daniil, your point there is that, or at least I know that in the case of MOST, like, this is a media based in Białystok, just across the border, but there is a local Belarusian community. They're continuing to cover it, but also with a slight twist, like also finding a new home at the same time. I don't think it's cutting the ties completely, right? Is that a fair sort of categorization?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I believe that editorially, I mean, changing the focus a little bit is fine. When I think of adapting editorially, I think of probably going for some new formats. And basically adapting editorially is something that will have to happen inevitably, both to Ukrainian media, Belarusian media, but also to international media reporting on Ukraine's war. Because the war fatigue, the audience fatigue is settling in already, and it's just been a month and a half. And then to make sure that the audience is still interested in this, we have to adapt. We have to change the formats. You know, we probably have to ditch the fast news and try to do more features. And then after that, we'll probably have to go to filmmakers and make sure that this story, however terrible this sounds, that the war story is exciting. And, you know, we can sell it to our audiences. And then after filmmakers, we'll probably have to go to book publishers and make sure that there are books, feature writing, you know, about what's happening in Ukraine. You know, I'm thinking about it all the time because the war in Ukraine started 8 years ago, and by 2022, everybody was like, "Oh my God, how could Russia invade Ukraine?" But wait a second, Russia invaded Ukraine 8 years ago. You just forgot about it. We stopped talking about it. No, we in Ukraine didn't, even though to some extent we also did. But, you know, in the world, they just stopped talking about what was happening in the eastern Ukraine. And now everybody was surprised like there was nothing. But there was a lot of lives lost in combat back then. There were millions of displaced people. And now, you know, we probably didn't adapt enough as journalists, as media community. But now we can't have that same mistake. Ukraine has already paid such a price for this, and will probably win anyway, but without the support, in the information support of the community, international media community, without the attention of the citizens of Europe, we will, you know, our victory will come at a much higher price, and we can't have that, we just can't. So it's on us, on journalists in Ukraine, but also on you guys, on journalists from different countries to find a way to adapt editorially to covering conflicts, to, you know, find a story that sticks and find a format that sticks. We at the Kyiv Independent want to go for a variety of different projects and formats and platforms that we didn't use before. From day one of the war, we went to, you know, on Telegram and Instagram, we weren't on before because we knew we had to try and deliver the information in all possible different formats, and we want to go on more platforms, and we want to explore more formats because that's on us, that's our front, and we have to be on the winning side as well.
Thank you for that. I'd like to switch to a slightly different topic, but also building on this idea of keeping the media vibrant, which is on the business side of things. So I think it's no sort of secret, but, you know, tell me if I'm getting it wrong, is that essentially all business, you know, in Ukraine has been frozen. From a media perspective, advertisers and so forth, all of this went to zero in a matter of...
I haven't heard of any case anybody advertising in Ukrainian media, so yeah. I think yes.
Okay, all right, well, there we go. Situation in Belarus, probably very much the same. And then, you know, of course you have digital advertising where, you know, Google and so forth, and for those who still used Yandex up until shortly, well, I mean, it was a thing, right, the Yandex ads. I think the number is falling quite rapidly of people who are using that, but...
Can I just, in Belarus, the situation actually was very complicated before the revolution. Businesses that advertised with independent media, from what I know, were prosecuted and pressured a lot. So, you know, it's also one of the forms to get to independent media.
Yeah, and actually today it's just simply dangerous to put advertising on media who are labeled as extremists, especially if you have an office.
Which is every independent media. If you're not an extremist in Belarus, you're clearly not doing things right.
Especially if you have an office in Belarus of your company. So it's just like shut yourself.
Yeah. So okay. So that's a pretty bad situation, right? To start with. But there's also something that's sort of coming, and that you know, the thing about wars and crises and revolutions and so forth is that it bounces back in ways that you never expect, right? Like there's the immediate reactions that you see, the immediate things that sort of happen, and then there's, you know, reactions and sort of changes that you never expected that hit you 3 months later out of the complete left field. One thing that I'm kind of worried about, or sort of thinking about, is for the region's media, is that for global companies, right? So local companies, they can't advertise, right? So global companies that previously advertised for the region, they, of course, were building much of their programs around Russia, right? Huge economy, huge media scene, and so forth. Now that everyone has stopped doing business in Russia, I mean, thanks God, but obviously, why would you still continue to advertise? So if the local advertising scene has died, you know, if I'm a global company in you know, New York or London or Singapore or Osaka, like, do I even have an advertising budget for Eastern Europe at this point? If Russia is off the table and Belarus is difficult and Ukraine is also like kind of tricky, like, do I just sort of cross off the whole region and say like, look, we're just gonna shift our advertising to Latin America, right? You know, this is at least what keeps me up at night, in addition to all of the other things. But there is part of a solution here, actually, Daniil, that you have been working on, and Kyiv Independent is part of. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, we've created a sales house, so to sell advertising. Basically, it's like we just find an international advertiser. It can be like you said, a company in New York, or it can be, I don't know, mobile gaming, or like etc., like some internet stuff. So and we have media that are part of our network, and we also have partner media. Not only Belarusian, we are now partnering with Ukrainian media such as Kyiv Independent, Ukrainska Pravda, also Gramatsky and others, Babel. Yeah, so that's the idea. So that's the way how we can make media more sustainable now, because media themselves does not need to do anything at all. So we have our salespersons who are making all the stuff, and media just getting like, you know, passive income.
Okay. And basically the argument is saying that, like, look, if these media who are by themselves, you know, maybe a little bit too small to go to global advertisers because you need a certain scale of budget and of visibility, if you're coming on behalf of 30 of these media, saying that together, you know, we have you know, 500 million in monthly visits, please consider us, you know, like, you don't need to cross off the region, right? Okay. What is the main selling point for?
Yeah, probably that's because we have now different like layers of audience. We have like at the same time hipsters. We have like IT people, like very like people who work at the factories. Yeah. So yeah, you can, you know, you can find any option to promote your goods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to add that for Ukrainian media, the main selling point is that you don't have to do anything. It's a passive income, because a lot of us are essentially understaffed. A lot of had to let go of commercial departments and commercial people. And now, you know, coming back, even if we see, for example, if I as a CEO see the opportunity for this, for you know, to find advertisers on the global level, I think Kyiv Independent is not even too small for that. I probably should go for that, but I don't really have capacity. I don't have people to set back up the commercial department and to, you know, get into this whole commercial process and finding advertisers, brainstorming the project, blah, 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 you know. So the fact that the network like that, you know, the sales house can do the work for you and make sure you just have a portion of the income is essential for us now, and probably will be essential for quite some time. So yeah, I think that for Ukrainian media, this is the main selling point.
Okay, all right. Well, but this is the selling point for the media participants, right? But in terms of the advertisers, so obviously there is a certain amount of, you know, corporate responsibility, right? Like you have all of those CSR budgets, please put them to good use. But aside from that, I mean, like, look, and by the way, I'm kind of curious, you know, being Polish and sort of looking at the Polish media scene, whether you would be open to work with them, because I think between the our three countries, you know, Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland, you have probably, I don't know, 20 or 30% of the world's IT outsourcing market. So is that sort of like a compelling thing? Is that something that you think, is there sort of a business, like the business case as well, that is compelling in this kind of network?
Yeah, I think that's possible. We will have some rules for the media to join us, like in order to be pro-democratic, yeah, and not to support Putin, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's essential.
Yeah, that's a really important one. That's I'm sure. Yeah. Okay, so Russia today is not joining the network.
They've tried, but no. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
Really, they did?
Actually, they've asked us to put some promotions to our media. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well.
Okay. Well, but look, this is a joke, but like, actually, I think I remember having a conversation with Medusa, and they were saying that look, Gazprom was actually one of our biggest advertisers, even during the time that they were labeled like as a foreign agent, and it was kind of a problem for Gazprom to find a way to place their ads. So but not taking Gazprom as an advertiser, I assume either.
Yeah,
yes?
sure.
Okay, no sanctions busting. Okay, please do, I don't know if anyone is sending questions. I am checking my DMs on the on Twitter, just in case. Again, it's J_PARUS. If anyone has been messaging and I'm not seeing it for any reason, can you raise a hand? Oh, you have, oh, damn. Okay, so something is clearly going wrong. Is there any way that we can just like ask questions? Yeah, just like with a microphone. Or. Can I just? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This is for Daryna. Do you think there's a need for Ukrainian language news in other countries that, for example, Ukrainians are seeking refuge in right now? So, for example, in Sweden, news in Ukrainian language that is telling Ukrainian refugees how to get their ID card and how to apply for jobs and job opportunities and social networks, this kind of thing.
No, I'm sure. I'm not sure that there is a need to like set up the whole new media outlet to do that, but I'm sure that we have to work on some kind of platforms like Telegram channels or Facebook pages or maybe simple landings that would provide all this practical information, because this is important. I mean, I came here through Poland. And when you cross a border from Ukraine to Poland, everybody treats you like a refugee if you're not. I was trying to explain that I will be coming back home like in a week, and they're like, no, you got food, take clothes. And but there is a lot of confusion. There are a lot of places, they try to give you like a SIM card, but you don't know why, and they have options, but nobody can really explain what are the options, So there is a lot of confusion, and it would be great if there was a place, maybe even a joint force like across different European countries where there are a lot of Ukrainians right now. I don't know, like the local in different languages, that would have a Ukrainian page with a few explainers explaining how to get an ID card, some support, how you can use public transfer, is it free, is it not free, or if it's not free, how you can get a pass or something like that. I think that's relevant.
Okay.
Guys, talk to them.
Yeah. This is really good. This is very actionable. Thank you. So I have actually, after 10 years of using Twitter, understood where to find message requests. Okay. So a couple of questions. So Daryna, can you talk about the verification process that you're using for a lot of the social media content that is popping up? And I think sort of expanding on that question a little bit is like, how do you sort of source information out of places like Mariupol, Crimea? How do you distinguish between the fake news, the propaganda, and what is true on all of these Telegram channels where it's difficult to tell reality from fakes?
Well, first of all, we use in the work context, there is no perfect way to fact check and make sure that everything you do is like 100% right. You can't really be sure that the numbers, for example, Ukrainian official sources are giving is their exact numbers. I mean, we know for a fact that in Mariupol nobody counts the dead. People are buried in mass graves, and just forgive me, rot in their destroyed apartments. There are hundreds and thousands of people dying there. It's not counted anywhere. But we have to, kind of as journalists, rely on the sources that are the most reliable of the sources we have, and those are the official sources in Ukraine. So we try to rely on those sources. When it comes to sourcing the information from the besieged towns and occupied regions, well, as journalists, we have big networks of contacts. So we try to find contacts in the cities that we know personally. Usually when a journalist talks to a person, we know the name and last name of that person. We find them on social networks, in the databases. They exist, and after we make sure they exist, we can change their name for the publication, because for many of them, it's we can't name them or can't say where they are. Sometimes we even have to change their story. For example, if a person is an owner of a bakery, we have to write something like he's an owner of a sausage shop or whatever. So because Russians are actually going through a lot of press and are targeting people who they can identify, it's crazy, but it's true. So, I mean, recently I, for example, found a couple of contacts in Kherson. This is the occupied city in Ukraine, in southern Ukraine, and I just called a friend who called a friend who gave me a contact of a person in the city willing to talk, and I knew that person through a friend. So that's how, basically, that's the best we can do to cover those regions. As for the fact-checking, so, we have photographers in Ukraine who take a lot of pictures. A lot of horrible pictures you've seen were taken by Ukrainian photographers. So basically we exchange that content often. If our photographer takes a picture and then somebody else's does, we usually use the photos of each other. We use the information from the colleagues we trust. For example, there is public broadcaster in Ukraine, and they have thousands of reporters across different regions, in different towns, villages, cities, and they have trustworthy source. So if they publish something like, our reporter witnessed this, we consider it as a credible source. If it's something like very unusual, we can call the reporter, and check with him or her, but usually we consider it a credible source. That's pretty much that. I don't know. Did I miss something?
No, I think that's really helpful. One sort of question or two questions that building on that. Thank you, Christian. Actually, what is the role of Ukrainian journalists, first of all, in terms of reporting on war crimes, and which I think you started on, but and then maybe let's start with that one.
I mean, I think that's the main goal for most of the Ukrainian journalists now, reporting on the war crimes. So from day one, we're documenting every, for example, that's how I contributed to the editorial work. Despite being a CEO, we were very understaffed, so I volunteered to contribute to the editorial work, and I was doing live updates. So we were doing these long stories day by day, documenting every air strike, every missile strike, every anything we could find and document. If there a picture, a video, a witness that could, suggest that this is what happened. Of course, we try to cover stories in a bigger depth whenever we can, get witnesses to talk, get war victims to talk to us. I think that's big, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of international institutions working on the war crimes documentation rely on the reports from Ukrainian journalists. I think that's how we also have, all the photographers try to take as many pictures as possible of what happened to Ukrainian cities, to Ukrainian people, and stuff like that. All of that will be part of the war crime investigations in the future.
Looking forward into those investigations, I know that right now cooperation with any Russian media is essentially taboo. What about if we're talking about future projects looking into finding the perpetrators of war crimes, and is that something that
I'm very skeptical about Russian media and their capabilities, good or bad, independent or dependent. Throughout this war, Belarusian media were actually helping Ukrainian media and giving us information on the movements on the border, of what's happening, risking their lives and risking the fact that they will be tortured in dungeons in Belarus. Well, guess what? There is very little help. I didn't know of any, actually, from Russian media. So I don't think, Russian media are any really capable of anything right now. I think their game is essentially over. And the, biggest thing they do is they go around and whine about how, sad they are for, being in this situation. Well, in the future, if some of the media emerge that will look like capable Russian media and will step up to take that role and suggest this help. But so far, I know of a couple of Ukrainian media who actually identify Russian soldiers committing the war crimes. Yeah. One of them is actually Следство Info. This is an investigative agency in the peaceful time that I worked for once. They are doing this. So they're using OSINT, they're cooperating with international partners to through social media and through the information available online to identify soldiers who served in the besieged towns and allegedly committed the war crimes. So now this is also on Ukrainian partners.
Mm-hmm. Moving to Belarus, because that's also a very interesting thing, and I know we're running out of time, so I think, well, let's take maybe 2-3 minutes to just close things off. There was actually quite a bit of information coming from both Belarusian media ahead of the invasion, with documenting like where the troops are moving, and now also where looted goods from Ukraine are being sold. I think personally I've seen quite a lot from the Telegram of Matolko, as well as a couple of other sources. What are you doing? This is a question. What can be done to protect those Belarusian media that are operating from and taking incredible risks to actually deliver this information?
Actually, it's hard to say. First of all, it's not always media, but sometimes it's just common people who are risking their lives by doing some stuff, by taking photos of missiles launched, of tanks moving somewhere. Some people are trying to wage a railway war by burning out some stuff so the trains cannot go to Ukraine. So that's the people who do that. They're risking their lives, their health, their freedom, and unfortunately, I don't see any way to protect them, to defend them, because it's just they know that they have to do that, because other way they cannot live with that.
Okay.
Isn't this crazy? Like that in the 21st century? We speak about people who know for sure they're gonna die or be tortured and kidnapped, and they still do it. This is the kind of heroism that exists but shouldn't exist in the 21st century. And this is what we are talking about in Belarus. They couldn't live with what they, if they didn't do it. Same with Ukraine, we couldn't do it in any other way, and all the reports about Ukraine falling within 3 days is, bullshit and would never happen. And, and there's Russia, whose civil society is like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't go protest, I'll be imprisoned. Well, And this is just shows that this war is not about anything else but values. It's a clash of values, essentially. We are fighting for freedom and democracy and for the right to live our life.
Quick reaction question on, is it quick comment on the closure of Dost, of Echo Moskwy. Was it the right move, the wrong move? What do you do in that kind of situations? Do you move into exile as well? They haven't, I think, so far. Okay, no comment.
I frankly
okay.
don't care.
All right, fine. Okay. thank you so much. One final question. I'm sure you've heard this already a lot of times. What's the most important thing to help you continue to function?
Talk about Ukraine's war. I mean, we need your information support. Many Ukrainian media are functioning, and then there are ways to donate to Ukrainian media. There are fundraisers on GoFundMe, both for the Kyiv Independent and for different Ukrainian media. Jakub will surely post links on his Twitter. If you followed him, I think that'll be there. But the main thing is, please keep talking about the war in Ukraine. Keep talking about what's happening in Belarus and how people in Belarus are risking their lives. Keep talking about us, because as soon as you guys go silent, our war becomes much harder. And we at the Kyiv Independent are always open to give comments, give interviews, talk to you, give you information, guide you on the ground. Just let us know if you need help. We'll do our best to help you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Daryna. Thank you, Daniil. All our best to your teams, and keep fighting the fight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and yeah.
Thank you.